Thank you so much, my friend, for downloading this particular podcast of In the Market with Janet Parshall. I hope you hear something this hour that will encourage, equip, edify, enlighten, and get you out there in the marketplace, exactly where God has called us to go, so we can let our light so shine and influence and occupy and seek the welfare of the city until he comes. Let me just take a couple of seconds of your time and tell you that this month's truth tool is called Candor, the secret to succeeding at tough conversations. I can't think of a better book for the times in which we find ourselves. We are called in the book of Ephesians to speak the truth in love, not a multiple choice test. You hear me say this all the time. Not an either or, but both in equal measure. And sometimes we're long on truth, short on love. Sometimes we're so full of love, we fail to mention the truth, which sets us free. So how do we have those tough conversations, particularly in a cancel culture? That's why I think this book is beautifully timed. It's written by a retired chaplain who lived in a world where toughness was required every single day of his life, but he also understood the mandate to do so with love. So you don't want to have unresolved relationships or unresolved conversations or silence yourself for fear of a negative consequence. Be bold, be biblical, be truthful, be loving. And our truth tool this month will tell you how to do just that. Ask for your copy of Candor when you call 877-JANET-58. That's 877-JANET-58. Or you can go online to inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. Either the website or the phone number, just make a donation of any amount and I'll send you a copy of Candor. And by the way, when you get to the website, find out what it means to be a partial partner. Those are the ever-enlarging circle of dear friends who every single month at a level of their own choosing decide that they're going to support financially In the Market with Janet Parshall. And the website will tell you how I say thank you to those dear people. So again, 877-JANET-58 or inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. This month's truth tool, Candor. And now please enjoy the podcast.
One listener that stands out that I worked with recently was this older couple that was interested in refinancing. Their credit wasn't the best. Not everybody has the 780 credit scores and never had any hardships in their life. I'll walk you through what you have to do. How can you end up being able to do this refinance, whether it's 2, 3, 6 months from now? We worked with them for months and months to improve their credit, and we were able to get the loan done. We were saving them hundreds each month, thousands of dollars a year, and they could start saving money each month, saving for retirement, which just put a huge smile on my face.
We are United Faith Mortgage.
United Faith Mortgage is a DBA of United Mortgage Corp., 25 Melville Park Road, Melville, New York. Licensed mortgage banker. For all licensing information, go to nmlsconsumeraccess.org. Corporate NMLS number 1330. Equal housing lender. Not licensed in Alaska, Hawaii, Georgia, Massachusetts, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Utah.
Here are some of the news headlines we're watching.
By the time the conference was over, the president won a pledge.
So are Americans worshiping government over God?
An extremely rare safety move by a nation.
17 years the Palestinians and Israelis negotiated.
Hi, friends. Welcome to In the Market with Janet Parshall. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, we're going to tackle a subject that I wish I could tell you only happened outside the church, but that would not be the case. In fact, if I can, Your Honor, I would like to submit as evidence A, the following documents. The first can be found in Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I also submit, Your Honor, 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. 2 Corinthians 7:16, but God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus. Isaiah 14:10, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I could go on. I could spend the rest of the hour, Your Honor, admitting for the court's review these documents. All right, I'll step away from my session of moot court here and simply tell you, hey, there's nothing new under the sun. Followers of Christ get depressed. Okay, it's a reality. Now, how can we get unstuck if you're stuck there? Is there a way out? If you are in the midst of a dark night of the soul, is there something that you can do to raise your heart, to raise your head, to raise your hopes? That's what we're going to talk about this hour. And we will be taking questions only on the topic of depression. And it's a big problem right now, culturally, globally, in the church as well. And I want to start out my conversation with Dr. Linda Mintle with a very straightforward question. But if you'll allow me, let me do the formal introduction here, because in this courtroom that I'm going to step back into momentarily, I have to get her credentials on the record for the jury's review. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, a national expert on relationships and the psychology of food, weight, and body image. She has over 30 years of clinical experience, having worked with families and couples and individuals. I absolutely love her approach to counseling because she has all the book learning out there, all the initials you could want after your last name. But she loves God, she loves His Word, and she loves people. And that makes her, from my vantage point, pretty powerful. She hosts her own radio program. She is a prolific author, has a blog, shows up everywhere. In fact, I've culled a couple of her stories on depression because Linda, being very astute and tuned in to the world around her, knows that depression is something that a lot of people live with. So let me get out of the courtroom finally, and I'll stay out. Linda, I want to ask you, first of all, the warmest of welcomes. Here's a virtual hug. Probably even if we were face to face, I'd be giving you a virtual hug in these crazy days in which we live. So here's the elbow punch instead. But I want to ask a question, and it seems kind of straightforward in one respect, but it's really kind of clinical when you think about it. Can somebody be depressed and not know they're depressed?
Well, yes, it happens all the time, and a lot of times when that is the case, people are commenting to them. I actually had this with a student. I won't say when and where and how that happened, but I kept watching this student in class and seeing this really down mood, and she looked angry at times and irritable, and she just didn't look like she was herself. And I finally went up to her after a few weeks and said, "Look, you don't look yourself. Is there something going on? Is something happening to you?" And she said, "Oh, you noticed?" And I said, "Yes, your outward appearance is very different. The way you're interacting with people, you're looking more isolated. You're not talking." And she said, "Well, I've wondered if something was wrong with me." And you pointing that out and talking about the difference makes me think that there's something significantly going on. And she went and got an appointment and found out that, yes, she was suffering from a clinical depression that she just didn't recognize. She knew she felt bad, but she didn't really recognize that she was depressed.
Wow. You know, the answer to that question alone absolutely affirms the necessity of this conversation, because there are probably people listening to us right now who, like this student, are also suffering from depression and haven't identified it as such or have yet to have it identified. So another follow-up question, and language is a blessing, but it's also a burden. It's the only way we have to convey ideas. So using the language that we have, cryptic though it is sometimes, what's the difference from feeling sad and being depressed?
It really has to do with the intensity of that sadness and how long that sadness goes on, and then if it impairs you or it gets in the way of your day-to-day functioning. So when we're looking at what a lot of people have heard the term major depression, when we're looking at that, it has to have occurred where there's at least a 2-week period where there's a depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, or there's this feeling of a loss of pleasure in almost all the things that you normally do. And then there's a list of symptoms that we look at, we check off, things that have to do with that depressed mood and that loss of interest, but also energy changes, maybe thoughts of suicide or thinking about death, sleep changes, feelings of worthlessness, appetite changes, difficulty concentrating. Some people get irritable and anxious. They either slow down or they speed up their actions in sort of a motor way. So when you look at all those symptoms, you have to have 5 of 9 of those over a period of time to actually qualify for a diagnosis of depression. But, depression is on a spectrum, Janet, with anxiety. So a lot of times what we see is people start off feeling anxious and they don't get treatment for the anxiety. And this is particularly true of children. A lot of times when I do the histories of depressed adults, they'll tell me that they felt anxious a lot in their childhood. Maybe they had a parent who was alcoholic, or their parents went through a divorce, or they had some kind of trauma, and they never addressed the issues, and they just felt anxious. And as they continued through life, that anxiety sort of with stress and a lot of other things that might happen in their life turns into depression. So this is on a spectrum where you can have anxiety to depression, and maybe a mild form versus a very severe form that is really difficult to function in. So it has a wide span.
Linda, when we come back, the first question I want to ask you after the break are the causes of depression, because you wrote very articulately that you can have some genetic reasons, you can have some biological reasons, you can have cognitive reasons, you can have spiritual reasons. So if you'd be so kind, break that down a little bit for me for some of the causes. And what I will do, friends, especially when you have the opportunity to talk to someone as wonderful as Dr. Linda Mintle, is I will open the phone lines. Again, questions only on the topic of depression, 877-548-3675. I'll give it to you again, 877-548-3675. Dr. Linda Mintle has graciously agreed to be with us for the entire hour. One topic on the table, the subject of depression. Now, it's multifaceted, and a lot of you listening have this, or you love somebody who's struggling. Come in with your questions. Dr. Linda Mintle will answer back after this. The Bible directs us to speak the truth in love, and sometimes we are long on truth or short on love. How do we do this? That's why I've chosen Candor, the secret to succeeding at tough conversations, as this month's truth tool. Discover how to share the absolute truth with unwavering love. Ask for your copy of Candor when you give a gift of any amount to In the Market. Call 877-JANET-58, that's 877-JANET-58, or go to inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. Dr. Linda Mintle is with us. We just love spending time with her, and how precious she is to give us the gift of her time on a regular basis. She's such a prolific author and touches so many crucial topics out there when it comes to interpersonal dynamics, interpersonal relationships, just does a stellar job. So in her blog, she's written recently about the topic of depression, being very tuned into the culture around. We know that this is actually a global epidemic right now, that depression is probably at some of its highest rates ever, particularly in the midst of COVID. But I want to go back to causal factors here, Linda. I love to pick your brains on this topic. And in one of your pieces, you broke this down a little bit, that there can be causes in a myriad of ways. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're saying that, because you have to be very careful not to judge someone where you think, oh, they're just in a down mood and they should be thinking differently, and why aren't they hopeful, when you don't really know their story. And so there are types of depressions that are more what we call genetically disposed. Some people are more genetically disposed to depression. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get depression. It just means that you have the genetics that might dispose you more. And we've looked at a lot of genetic research, and it isn't a single gene; it's a combination of genes. But sometimes it can make you more vulnerable. And then when you have life experiences or things that happen to you, that depression can express itself. And there are biological factors. You know, there are the PMS types of depression and hormone changes related to, giving birth and menopause, and there are medication side effects that sometimes cause depression. Heart disease is a big one. I do a lecture in the medical school on heart disease and stress, and one of the biggest fallouts of heart disease is depression. It a lot of times develops after someone has had a major cardiac event. So you can also get things that are rooted in loss, and boy, let's just think about all the loss that people have been through. Loss, not only loss of loved ones through the death by COVID, but loss of their family members, loss of homes, loss of jobs, loss of social interactions. I feel like I've lost my church community because we're now back in a really big surge again with the Delta variant, and so we're not live again. You get depressed sometimes when there's a lot of change, and you're just experiencing. Even though change can be good, it's stressful, so that can sometimes happen. A lot of medical conditions, as I mentioned. Sometimes just a lot of unresolved anger and unrepentance. And, messing around in the occultic world. Those are ones we don't usually think of, and you have to be careful not to, just call everything depression, but they can cause that kind of fallout. And then really a lot of it is the negative thinking patterns that the Bible is so specific about in terms of, keeping your mind renewed and focusing on the hope and the love of Christ and all the remedies that we need to do, because the brain is biased negatively. So if we just let our brain go, and this is why you see this in secular culture where people are not redeemed by the Lord, the brain is biased and it looks for the negative because it's always searching for danger and protecting you. So you have to be very intentional with your thoughts to keep yourself from going into a negative place. So again, lots of causes. And that's really important to get at the root. What is going on? Because once you understand more of what the root is, that's going to determine then what you do to make things better.
Oh, wise counsel. I hope, friends, you heard that. Dr. Linda Mintle, our guest. Our topic is depression. Our number 877-548-3675, 877-548-3675. Mark, if I may, let me welcome you from Florida. Your question, please, for Dr. Mintle.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Real quickly, I have a born-again believer girlfriend. We've known each other since we were 11 and 12, childhood sweethearts. Had a really good thing going for a couple of years. I am not depressed. She is. And the mood swings, the change of attitude, it was too much, and we've kind of put a pause on this, but I'd like to save it. Is there any advice for those that don't understand depression but are willing to help and trying to learn?
Yeah, and when you talk about mood swings, it makes me think right away of more of a bipolar depression. So I've been talking major depression is more of what we call unipolar, but bipolar is really characterized by those mood swings that can be very significant, and they're very difficult because the person has these sort of highs and then they go into these lows, and depending on how that all plays out, it can be tough in a relationship to deal with that because the mood switches. And when you're dealing with bipolar depression, you really do need to get some type of medication approach with that. We do know that is very organically based, that medication is really necessary for almost all people. I don't think I've had anybody I've treated in 30 years where we haven't had them on some type of medication for bipolar, because you have to keep those swings down, and then what happens is you can swing high, and that can be very frustrating because then you can act out and do all kinds of things in a manic episode, or you can get really, really low. And if you have bipolar 2, which is characterized by a lot of depression, you're very much at risk for suicide. So those people really need to be stabilized on medication, and then they can live very functional lives. The problem is that people start to take the medication, then they feel better, and they think, well, I don't need the medication. I feel fine without it. And even a lot of my patients said, and I miss the mania because I feel great on top of the world when I'm in that state, and I don't want to give it up, but it makes it very difficult in interpersonal relationships. So, Mark, I would just talk about when you are like this, and I know that that's a function of your depression, it makes it really difficult for us to function, so that I'm willing to go in with you, I'm willing to talk to somebody with you, understand more about bipolar disorder, work with you, but, medication is probably going to be a part of that. And so many people who get on meds for bipolar disorder do very well and function very well in relationships.
Mark, I hope that's a cup of encouragement for you, and I thank you for being a part of this conversation. You hear the music? I'm going to take a break. 877-548-3675, 877-548-3675. By the way, if you'll go to our website, inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org, click on the red box. It says Program Details and Audio. Takes you to the info page. And particularly for Dr. Linda Mintle, this is important. She has a fabulous website, lots of writing, references to her books, and I've just pulled one for your perusal. It's called Breaking Free from Depression, a Balanced Biblical Strategy for Emotional Freedom. It's all part of a Breaking Free series. So check it out. It's all on our website, inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. Back after this. Licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical social worker, national expert on relationships and the psychology of food, weight, and body image, Dr. Linda Mintle is our guest. Hosts her own radio show, written several books, has a blog that's fabulous. And because she wrote recently on the topic of depression, we decided that would be a good conversation. And based on the number of calls online, I think we're right. 877-548-3675. Tara in Indiana, thank you for stopping by. Your question, please.
Yes, I was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety back 2003, and finally, after some medication therapy, 2011, I was basically back to myself. My question is, through therapy and everything, we never did discover what we would call a reason for my depression. Nothing had gone on. I didn't have any abuse, no family, nobody died. Can depression be just an imbalance in the chemicals in your brain and not really be caused by any life-altering issues?
Well, it's more complicated than just chemicals in your brain. I know we hear that all the time, but there's a lot that influences. I mean, I don't think we think about often the role of things like lifestyle factors as well. And I'm not saying these are what happened with you, Tara, but I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about it. But, you know, people that have chronic sleep problems a lot of times will struggle with depression. Sometimes even the diet that you eat. It's interesting when you look at the gut and the brain connection, because the gut is very sensitive to emotions, and it's impacted by gut bacteria, which makes diet really a factor to consider when you're trying to help your mood. And I don't think a lot of people think about that. They don't think about what I'm eating may have some impact in the way I feel. But the American diet, which is high in the consumption of red meat, refined grains, sweets, you know, high-fat dairy products, butter, potatoes, gravy, all the good stuff, but it's also associated with the risk of depression. So, and then we look at things like, you know, being exposed to screens and blue lights in the screens that can overstimulate the brain, and, you know, they impact the hormone of melatonin, which has to do with sleep. So there's a lot of stuff. Loneliness can be in there with everything else. So you may not go back to a specific thing. Now, a lot of people do have childhood experiences. We call those adverse childhood experiences. There's actually a rating of that on a 10-point scale. Things like neglect and abuse and divorce of a parent and a whole poverty and different things that are on that list. And we know that those things are predictors of adult mental health problems. But you also can be an anxious child. I was just dealing with a patient today where a report where the patient said that all through her life she had been very anxious, and she didn't exactly know why, but that anxiety was kind of built up and she never really dealt with it. She wasn't comfortable in conflict. She didn't really know how to interact well with her peers, and so she had much more of a sort of a anxious approach to life and more of a fearful. So it can be a lot of things like that. But a lot of times we sort of look at, is it a temperament? Is it the way you responded to people? And the way you learn to interact in your family. And I'll talk about that because I do a lot of family work. And just the response to stress and change and all kinds of things can lead to a child feeling anxious and maybe even depressed over time.
Wow. And I thank you so much for the answer. And Tara, I thank you so much for the question as well. 877-548-3675. And let me go to Stephen in New Hampshire. Stephen, thanks for being here. Please, your question.
Yes. Hi. I've had some very chaotic relationships, and I got married when I was 41, and things changed considerably. I all of a sudden developed some anger, and significant anger, and I read up on borderline personality disorder, and it just seemed to fit me to a T. Unfortunately, I would rather have not that been the case, but I just was wondering if your guest could address that for me.
So I'm not sure what part of the conversation I got cut off in the middle of this, Janet. Maybe you could help me with that. I was talking a lot about the lady who called in before, and I just heard the very tail end. I don't know what happened. I was listening. I thought I didn't see anything happen on my end, but anyway, we got cut off. So I think the caller is talking about anger and borderline personality disorder. Is that what I heard?
Mm-hmm. Right, Stephen? That's what you're looking at, right?
Yes, I got married when I was 41, so I got married late in life, and
okay,
didn't see any signs of any anger. And when I got married, it just all of a sudden showed up. Probably 15 or so years into our marriage, I started looking into borderline personality disorder, trying to understand why things were had gone so crazy, and it just really seemed to fit me to a T.
Okay.
And
okay.
so I was just wondering if you could help me with that.
Yeah, so that's interesting, but it's borderline personality disorder is one of those. It's called a personality disorder because it develops over time, and there are these enduring patterns of behavior that develop from when you're a teenager on. So very few people suddenly become borderline personality disorder in their 40s. Probably was latent. It was probably there. But here's the interesting thing about relationships, Stephen. It's easier to manage life when you're by yourself and you can make all the decisions. But when you get in relationships where intimacy and self-sacrifice and having to pay attention to other people's needs and putting other people first, that is a whole different ballgame. So probably what happened is that relationship just was sort of stirring up a lot of things that were there already and brought it to the surface that you would have to work on. So work on that hostility, because that's definitely a relationship difficulty in any relationship.
Stephen, thank you. So appreciate your being a part of this. 877-548-3675. That's our number here on In the Market with Janet Parshall. We're visiting with Dr. Linda Mintle. Our topic, depression. More of your questions right after this.
Hey there, I'm Jamin Baxter, and I get to serve Moody Radio as the Director of Business Development. Our team's job is to find businesses that love Moody Radio and Jesus Christ and want to support the work we do financially, just like you. Today, I'd like to introduce you to C.H. Hansen. They work in the metalworking and construction markets. Some of their brands are Superior Tool, Norse, and Palmgren. They make stencils, clamps, layout tools, and more, and you can find their tools in stores like Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Lowe's, McMaster Car, True Value, Granger, and many, many more. Check out their website at chhansen.com. That's chhansen.com. Thanks to you and to C.H. Hansen for supporting Moody Radio.
We can all safely say that society seems to be decaying before our eyes. On In the Market, we're tackling the issues head-on from a biblical perspective so you'll know how to influence and occupy, as Scripture says. Become a partial partner today and support In the Market. As a benefit, you'll receive exclusive resources every week prepared just for you. Call 877-JANET-58 or go online to inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. Once again, we're having a wonderful conversation with Dr. Linda Mintle, licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, and a national expert on relationships and the psychology of food, weight, and body image. She's got more than 30 years of clinical experience. She hosts her own radio show, prolific writer, does a blog, excellent communicator. And by the way, she's written recently on the subject of depression, so we picked up on that, put it out as our topic of the day with Dr. Linda Mintle, and every line is lit as a result. Not a surprise. 877-548-3675. Victor, you're in the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thanks for joining us. Your question, please.
Oh, hi, Janet. First time calling. I've listened to you for a long time. Very enjoyable and insightful.
Thank you.
I'm wondering. I lost my friend and minister 4 years ago. She passed overnight suddenly. I've been having outbursts in time. I've gotten a little bit of counseling here and there, but I started seeing someone, and I don't know if this is related to depression because, I'm going to say it, me and her started sleeping together. And we're not really intimate at times, but I don't know. I just felt very empty, and, I'm not sure if that's a result of that happening with my friend or what. Yeah. I'm not really sure.
Well, I think it's good that you're going and you're talking to a therapist about this, because I think when you have a sudden loss, and depending on other times of your life when you've experienced loss, grief can be prolonged. It can be what we call complicated after a period of time because it persists, and there's some things that are in there. There may be some guilt in there if this is a person of faith and you're not living your life according to your biblical beliefs, that does cause guilt for a lot of people, and it should in some ways. It should cause guilt, but if you're still in that position and you're not living your life congruently with what you believe, that causes people a lot of angst and a lot of guilt that they don't really recognize sometimes, or they don't even talk about that. So one of the things that I do with patients is I ask them, what do you believe? What is your belief about having sex outside of marriage or being intimate with a partner before you're married to somebody? And then when you lose somebody, you've got all this grief complication on top of everything else. And so a lot of the work is aligning what you believe to what you did, and then figuring out if any of those things have complicated the grief and the loss. And sudden loss is much more difficult for a lot of people than a loss that maybe they anticipated. I'm not minimizing loss like from a chronic illness or something like that, but when you have a sudden unexpected loss, it can be very, very difficult as well. And that can trigger a lot of feelings of feeling out of control in your life from other times. So I would get in and talk about all of those things, and it's good you're going. It's good that you're getting some help with this, because you don't want it to go into a full-blown clinical depression. So thanks.
And thank you, Victor, for being a part of the conversation. I do appreciate it. 877-548-3675. Connie in Florida, I welcome you. Your question now, please.
Yes, ma'am. I had taken care of my mother, and she just recently passed, and I, years imagining that it would just devastate me, which I just don't understand if it's the peace of God or if I'm okay, because I didn't break all apart, and I didn't know if that's a type of depression or...
Well, no, praise God for that. Yeah, no, praise God for that. You've been under prolonged stress. Caregivers have a lot of stress. A lot of times caregivers get very burnout. It's a difficult job. It's unrelenting. You have to be so attentive to what's going on when you're taking care of someone, especially someone who has illness and is at the end of their life. It's a tough job, and we don't always pay attention to what's going on with the caregiver in that process. But sometimes when you're in that caregiving and you see them deteriorating over time, there is a certain type of preparation for their death that comes with that, almost to the point for some people where you never want to lose that person, but sometimes there's even a sort of a feeling of relief for the person who is suffering. So it's understandable that you might have been more prepared than you thought. And praise God that if you're a person of faith and a follower of Jesus, He says that He will comfort you with all the comfort that you gave her. He's going to comfort you with that same comfort. So this is just a good praise report that we can face loss, and we can do it with Christ, and we can be overcomers, and we can move through grief. I've lost several people in my life. If I didn't have the Lord, I don't know how I would have faced all those losses. Some were sudden, some were prolonged, but it's God's grace and His immense ministering in the time of that grief that allows us to move through that dark time and come out in a good way. So praise God for that. It's a great testimony.
Connie, thank you. 877-548-3675. Doc in Indiana, welcome. We'll take your question now, please.
I wanted to piggyback off of the last or a former caller, number 41-year-old gentleman, I think, and ask how much do you think low testosterone or sleep apnea play into the development of depression in gentlemen of that age group?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to bring up. One of the things that you should always do when you're struggling in your sad feelings or feeling down or irritable, or you're in a relationship and you're just not yourself, would be to go get a physical and rule out those things. And by that I mean check them out with your physician and make sure that it's not resulting, low testosterone, because that can make you irritable. You can have anger and other types of feelings. Sometimes when you get your testosterone levels corrected, you feel way better. And sleep apnea is a big one. When the body is interrupted with sleep, And sleep is like the big reboot of the night. So just think of it as if your computer was getting all filled up with stuff during the day, and it was getting overloaded, and you were starting to get, slowness and shutdowns and hacking and all kinds of stuff. Sleep is like when you reboot and you clean it all out, the body needs to do that. And people with sleep apnea get that sleep cycle interrupted, and it creates a lot of stress on the body, and it creates that irritability and depression. So sleep apnea, if you have that issue, you should get a sleep study done. You should look at sleep hygiene, maybe get a CPAP machine or whatever you need to make sure that you're getting a good night's rest. So those are great things. Taking care of your physical body a lot of times will help a lot of types of depressions.
Doc, thank you. And Leslie, you're in Illinois. Linda may have just answered your question because it's about sleep and depression, but please, I want to give you a chance to ask him more.
Hi, I'm already a very depressed person. I do have a counselor. I have actually have a Stephen minister, but I'm experiencing all of a sudden, and I haven't had anything like this in just a zillion years because I'm old, but I'm experiencing a great deal of anxiety, so I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm not able to get back to sleep, which makes me even more anxious. People have said get some melatonin, get some Xanax.
Well, I don't want you to get Xanax. Don't get Xanax. You can try the melatonin, but I'm not a prescriber, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But too many people get hooked on those benzodiazepines, which Xanax is one, and then they get dependent, and then you tolerate it, and then you need more, and it's not good. It doesn't help your memory long term. There's a lot of issues with those. So unless you desperately need it, and you've had a lot of conversations with your doctor, I would try other things first. So one of the things you have to think about is what's going through your mind when you're getting ready to go to sleep. If your mind is constantly racing, then one of the best things you can do is to do some good sleep sort of preparing things. So you get yourself calm. You might get a cup of tea, not with caffeine, a cup of tea that's herbal. You get in a quiet space. Maybe you take out your Bible. Maybe you take one verse from the Bible and you really focus on it. When you distract your mind away from negative things and onto the things that are, this is right out of Philippians, good, lovely, of good report, praiseworthy, all that list in Philippians 3, when you start to focus, even if you say the name Jesus, and you start to say the name Jesus, Jesus, help me to sleep tonight, but you think of the positive, because what happens so often is we get these racing thoughts when we're going to bed, and we're kind of calm for the first time in the night, and all of a sudden all this stuff kind of floods into our heads, and we inadvertently wake up. Sometimes when people wake up, I tell them, well, just go do something that will make you sleepy. Pull out a book, start reading, do something that will just get you right back to sleep again. So think about what is causing that anxiety and then work on that, and that will probably help with the sleep problems.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate it. Let me take a break. Again, our number is 877-548-3675, 877-548-3675. If I may, let me draw you again to our information page on the website, inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. You'll see a red box. It says Program Details and Audio. Click that on. Takes you to the information page, a little longer bio for Dr. Linda Mintle, but a link to her website, which is chock full of great information. And on the right-hand side, a resource that is very germane to our conversation today. It is called Breaking Free from Depression, a Balanced Biblical Strategy for Emotional Freedom. One of the reasons why we love talking to Linda. All the book learning, but really understands the biblical approach to this. Let me take a break. We'll come back. More of your questions. 877-548-3675. Such an important topic, and I'm so grateful for people like Dr. Linda Mintle, who understands the physiology, the psychology, and the biblical aspects of depression as well. 877-548-3675. Cindy, you're in Massachusetts as well, and you've been oh so patient. I greatly appreciate it. Your question, please.
Hello. I have been depressed for many, many years. My doctor calls it a major depressive disorder. I take two different medications for depression, Wellbutrin and Cymbalta. I've also lived with chronic pain for almost 20 years, and I take very high opiate doses for medication. Just to give you a little bit of a backdrop, I don't have anything in my life that makes me sad. Well, I did lose my mom, but besides that, what I'm dealing with is that it's gotten significantly harder, especially since my mom died. And I feel the need to find a counselor. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, how important is it that I have a Christian counselor as opposed to a secular counselor?
Well, I think it's important to get a Christian counselor who's very competent and knows what they're doing. That's going to be my caveat with a Christian. The Christian counselor will use the biblical worldview, which is very important in terms of helping you with the renewing of your mind, helping you with incorporating sort of biblical principles into your life. So I do feel like that's very important in doing that. But you've got a lot going on. You know, the chronic pain itself. You've got a centralized nervous system that has wound up. It's rewired your brain. It's creating problems with perception of pain in the brain. I wrote a book called Living Beyond Pain. That's an area that I'm really well versed in. And so there's a lot of things that you need to do to take down the volume of the pain, to help stabilize you more in that area. So you might want to get a Christian counselor who has some expertise in pain, and one of your antidepressants is one that also does help with pain, Cymbalta. So you might want to get somebody who understands the relationship between chronic pain, because pain and emotions, depression, are very related. They actually share the same real estate in the brain. So when you're dealing with both of those, that one can be exacerbating the other. And so you have to have somebody who understands how wound up your nervous system is over time, that develops, and there are many techniques, many types of things that we can do to help you turn down that volume on pain and to help you with better functioning. And so any stress, any loss, any change is just going to exacerbate all of that. So I personally feel like it's very important in this day and age to get somebody who can work from a biblical perspective, can constantly give you hope, can use Scripture in terms of helping you interpret how to actually apply those scriptures in a way that has psychological soundness. I mean, that's a lot of what I do. I don't use any type of therapy, even though it's evidence-based, unless it fits with a biblical approach. So I don't want somebody going off and, teaching you all kinds of Buddhist strategies and things like that for mindfulness. You need to understand like a Christian mindfulness, which is putting on the mind of Christ, focusing on the object of our affection, which is Christ Jesus, not emptying the mind, but filling the mind with Christ. There are some differences there with therapies. So I think that would be a really great step for you because you're going through a lot.
Thank you, Cindy. 877-548-3675. Alicia in Montana, thank you for being here. Your question.
Yeah, hi. I am wondering and wanting information about the grief and anger that get stored in the heart after the childhood abuse and neglect. And so having been an avoidant and a person who has been disconnected from my feelings for 50 years, what am I trying to say?
Well, it's a great connection you're making. Yeah, okay. You're making a great connection, Alicia.
Okay. I'm starting to feel these feelings, but yet I'm a little bit compulsive with food because it's like things are stirring in me.
Yeah, it's all connected.
So I try to comfort myself with food.
Yep.
And then, so it's like I'm wondering about how to grieve these losses of childhood, and then I married an emotionally abusive man, a verbally abusive man, and so I'm working through all these things. So I'm wondering about grieving those losses.
Yeah, well, it's more. I'm going to start with where you started with the anger and deal with that, because part of the big work, and I'm glad because someone else brought up anger before too, and I wanted to say more, so thank you for bringing it up, because a lot of times what we have to do is deal with forgiveness. Now, that's a tough topic when you've been hurt, you've been wounded, you've been abused, but it is so clear that when we hang on to unforgiveness, And we could do a whole show on that. I'm actually involved in a research study right now of a forgiveness intervention nationally and internationally, where we're looking at the role of unforgiveness in people's lives and teaching people that the importance of forgiveness, how to forgive. Forgiveness is a decision that you make. The process of that takes time, and there's a lot of steps in working through that forgiveness. You have to acknowledge what happened to you, and then you have to really figure out the impact of that, what it did to your life, and then how you can deal with the impact of that, because that's the part you have control over, how you respond to it. And the biblical notion of forgiveness in this process, which is not an easy step, is such an important step in releasing people and giving them real freedom. So I would say you're in the right thinking. You need to deal with not just the losses, but the anger and probably forgiveness of all the people that have hurt you during your lifetime, because you're just getting triggered with the emotional abuse right now. So look at unforgiveness and see if you can do some work with that and the anger that you might have related to that.
Hope that helps, Alicia, and I thank you so for being with us. Linda, every line's remained lit throughout our entire conversation, so thank you for being so tuned in to the culture around us. Thank you for your excellent, very insightful writing, and thank you, as always, for the gift of your time. Let me just put a capstone in this conversation, and I want to come full circle to where I started my conversation with you. So somebody listening to this hour is going, wait a minute, I've heard there's a myriad of causes for depression. I heard Janet ask the question of Linda, and Linda answer that, yes, you can be depressed and not even know. If something feels off, let me just put it in that phrase. If something feels off, and after hearing this conversation, somebody's going, could I, am I, maybe, where do they start? What's their first step?
I would contact your pastor as a starting place, your church, maybe for a referral, and go see somebody and get evaluated and see what's going on. And then somebody can direct you into maybe what is going on in your life that could be helpful to make some changes.
Excellent. Linda, thank you so much. That conversation just flew by, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt you afforded a lot of people some encouragement. So again, I want you to go to our website, check out Linda's website, all kinds of information. Again, her book, Breaking Free from Depression, a balanced biblical strategy for emotional freedom. It's part of her Breaking Free series. You can learn more by going to our website. What a wonderful hour, as always, with Dr. Linda Mintle, and it was wonderful to spend it with you. See you next time.